This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode, I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 398 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Today we're talking about conservation and tourism. Let me firstly pay my respects to the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation where I'm recording this podcast. And since we're talking about conservation, I think it's extra appropriate to mention that the current Noongar season here is Makuru, the cold and wet part of our year. The 6 Noongar seasons focus very much on conservation of nature. Basically, the traditions and the rituals they have for each season utilise the resources in a way that's regenerative and really focused on long-term survival of plant and animal species, really ancient knowledge. And I'm glad that finally scientists are realising that we can learn a lot from these traditions. So it's pretty cool. In this episode, we are actually covering quite a variety of conservation issues related to travelling, from wildlife to physical environments and nature, and all the way through to historical and cultural heritage too, with an issue in the United States that was entirely new to me and very interesting. But before that, I'm going to start with my first guest, James Ward. With Rewild Safaris, James has spent many years planning and running tours across the world, but always with a focus on conservation. And I asked him what that means to him.
There's a few levels of what we do with conservation. So first off, as opposed to a carbon offset, we do a conservation offset. So it's the same calculation, but that money is going to conservation groups to support protecting the areas that we're visiting and all over the world. Then you have, most camps or destinations that are in wildlife will say they have some level of conservation sustainability. We're looking for that next level up where it truly is benefiting the conservation and the local communities. On that level for us, conservation travel, it does need to support both. And so by that, they're hiring local communities. Local communities are directly benefiting from the fees that you're paying there. The money's not being pulled out by, an international conglomerate. And if you think about it, and I say this from the U.S. point of view, we are going, and if I say Africa, this could happen in India, it could be any one of these, Borneo, Sumatra, Patagonia, South America. We are asking them not to destroy their natural resources in the sense of forests, wildlife, when in the U.S., that's what we did in order to become one of the top economies in the world, right? So now it's tough to go in and say that. What we designed, we want to have that biodiversity worth more intact than extracted. That is done through ecotourism, creating jobs in those areas. And in a lot of these places we go, in the U.S., you have this problem. People are moving to the cities for jobs. And there it's even worse. They're moving for jobs. So trying to create jobs in these locations that they can stay there and then they become protectors of that resource. Like Madagascar, if ecotourism doesn't increase there and it doesn't become more, those forests are disappearing. And then it's 90% of the species on Madagascar are only found on Madagascar. And I think 70 to 80% of those are endangered because the forests are disappearing at an alarming rate. And so trying to build ecotourism. And what I look to do is where are those places and how can we help them by bringing more travelers to that? But it's also balancing over tourism. Now for us, we're lucky. I don't like crowds. I don't think it's a great experience if you're sharing a sighting with 100 other vehicles. So we do try to get people away from where everyone's going. So we're trying to balance that out and bring that to other places. So as I said, like North Luangwa is a place people don't go. We're looking Gorongosa in Mozambique, Angola, to try to say there are some great places to travel to do that and then build that ecotourism up. That's the one part. For the traveler side, what we try to do is what we call it, we rewild the traveler. Right? We want people to get back to nature. For health reasons, it's well proven that people getting out in nature, enjoying fresh air, getting away from human-made sounds benefits your health. But we also want people, what we hope by our travelers and some of the experience that we design is we hope that they come back as supporters, ambassadors, and advocates for conservation. And we do that we work with conservation groups in all of our destinations to try to create experiences. And experiences can be as simple as a conservation group coming in and talking to them at a lodge, them going out and seeing some of the work that they do. Or in some cases, we had a group that helped release Darwin's rhea in Patagonia. We've had people help with chipping rhino horns and doing the actually active conservation. And that is all dependent on the destination. A lot of, you can't schedule conservation, so sometimes you luck into some of that. We're also very conscious that you don't want to commercialize conservation. They are there to do a job, and we're not there to disrupt that. And we're not there to exploit it. So it is a fine balance, but for what I know, we're the only, if not one of the few safari operators that actually has a director of conservation. And that person's job solely is to work with conservation groups and figure out that balance and what they're comfortable with. And when we're on a call with them, the first thing we say is, this has to work for you, both financially, because there's a donation aspect to it, but also within what your ethos are, what you're comfortable doing, and most importantly, what is going to have as little effect on the wildlife as possible. We work with groups. We had one group that was in Kenya visiting one of the conservation destinations that when they came back, now it was a zoo group that was there. One of their travelers gave an 8-figure donation to the zoo.
Wow.
So that's real money. Now, listen, I would love to say that we were the only reason for that. Obviously, the zoo worked really hard and had probably been developing that donor for years. But we like to say that we were a part of it. And that's one. But with the group I was with was friends and family. We visited a conservation group while we were there. And it was, people were like, okay, how do we donate? What do we do? And so when they are exposed to that, that's what our goal is. And that's what we try to do with conservation travel. Not just, say it's sustainable and you're just going to go see elephants in the wild. How are we helping to save those elephants so the next generation can come and see those same or at least their ancestors?
Well, yes, you have a vested interest in keeping our world wonderful as well.
Well,
yeah,
I like to say we all do, right? So
absolutely, yes.
But
absolutely.
we, it's so one of the places that I'm looking to develop is in the Congo River Basin, and it's strictly for, that's one of the lungs of the world, right? And it's the same with Sumatra and Borneo. It's developing it to protect those because it protects everybody. And I know 95% of the world will never see those places. They just don't have the means to do it, but it's those that do and those that we can get there. And then hopefully they're coming home. And that's where the advocacy ambassadorship comes in to say, oh, this is what we need. I saw this.
Some great examples there from James of the different ways that tour operators can really push for conservation of nature, whether wildlife or a whole ecosystem, to be an important consideration in how the industry runs and in what travellers do and see. Good stuff. My next guest today is Joshua Zukas, a travel writer who lives in Vietnam, and he shares a great example of sustainable tourism that he's come across in Vietnam.
I think that Vietnam has a really good example of conservation-based travel, and that is Phong Nha Ke Bang National Park, which is in central Vietnam. It hit the headlines about 15 years ago because in 2009, they discovered that this national park had, at least by one measure, the biggest cave in the world. It has many, many caves. It was kind of first discovered in the 1990s, and then it was kind of lost, and then it was rediscovered in the 2000s, and then it was surveyed in 2009. And that's when they discovered that it had the biggest chamber cross-section of any known cave chamber anywhere in the world. So there are different ways that you can measure caves. You can measure length, you can measure volume. But one way is to measure cross-sections, and this cave certainly has that. That was kind of a bit of a hook for tourists, and it sparked a kind of tourism boom, a mini tourism boom. What I find quite interesting about the national park is that, we love superlatives. I try not to use them when I write, but, people do love superlatives. So, when you see like the biggest cave in the world, it's something that people get excited by. But what's interesting about the national park is that there are dozens, if not hundreds of caves. So people were hooked by the fact that this area had the biggest cave in the world, at least by one measure. But then they later discovered that this cave was maybe quite expensive to visit, or it was actually quite a mission to visit, because there are no roads to this cave. So to begin with, it took a week to visit, because you'd have to trek there and trek back, and that would take 2 or 3 days. And then you'd visit it, and it was the biggest cave in the world, so it takes a couple of days to visit. That's not for everybody. But there are all of these other caves in the national park as well. People were able to visit other caves that were more suitable to what they wanted and also more suitable to their budgets. What kind of happened is that Phong Nha quite quickly, I guess, in a couple of years became this caving destination with lots of different types of caves, including super adventurous ones like this biggest one. It was called Sơn Dong by the guy that discovered it and then rediscovered it 2 decades later. He's a local Vietnamese guy. Because of the number of caves, they could be visited in different ways by different types of people. So Sơn Dong was the very adventurous one that took a week to visit, was expensive to visit too. But then there were other caves that were much easier to visit. They were good for families, for example. And then you have everything in between. So you have caves that you could visit just in a couple of days or just in 2 days and 1 night. I think what was so smart about the tourism development there is when tourism started to boom and people started to visit not just from Vietnam, but from all over the world. Before that, the national park was looted by local people. It's a very poor part of Vietnam. So a lot of people would go into the national park and loot it for its animals, for its wildlife, but also for its rare wood. What happened simultaneously is international tourism came into the area. At the same time, regulations were very strictly enforced. No more logging, no more hunting. And then I think the beauty of the program, or the beauty of this development, is that the former loggers and hunters got jobs in tourism because they had all of the skills, right? So a lot of these former loggers and hunters became tour guides if they spoke English, or porters or cooks if they didn't. They were perfect for the job because they survived by going into the jungle and hunting and logging. They kind of developed these transferable skills, which also made them good for porters, tour guides, and chefs. So we have a really good example here of, I think, genuine sustainable tourism, because we have an environmental element with the conservation of the national park, because the rules were strictly enforced, no more logging, no more hunting. But we also have social and economic elements in that we're supporting the local community and providing them with good jobs, better jobs, in fact. Hunting and logging they were not good jobs. I mean, of course, it was damaging to the environment in a big way, but these work jobs also weren't stable. Sometimes these hunters and loggers would go into the jungle for days and come back with nothing. So now they're no longer hunters and loggers, but they're tour guides, chefs, and porters, and they have stable incomes. So I think this is a really fantastic model, and I think it's a model that probably isn't championed enough. In media, we tend to be quite kind of Euro or Western-centric. It feels like the learning process is quite one way. We expect developing countries to learn from developed ones. But I think this is a really good example of how developing countries and even developed countries can learn from a developing one. It's very rare, I think, to come across an example of sustainable tourism like this one.
Yeah, I found this a really interesting case, and one that kind of shows what can be done when we're starting from the beginning, starting from scratch. A lot of the problems, I think, with places where travel is having a negative impact on conservation are places where we kind of need to retrofit sustainability to the way a place has been managed for decades or even centuries. So, yeah, it makes it trickier. Anyway, we've covered wildlife and landscape so far, but my final guest today is talking about a great example of culture and heritage conservation. Russell True is a lifelong dude rancher and also a past president of the Dude Ranchers Association and a board member of the Ranch Preservation Foundation. So he knows his stuff, and I asked him to tell me more about the importance of conserving this part of history and culture in the United States.
Our ranch joined the Dude Ranchers Association coming up 40 years ago. And so I was a whole lot younger. I was in my late 20s. And that was one of the best things we ever did because it exposed us. Because otherwise, Dude Ranchers are not like a string of hotels, or we live in some degree of isolation and we operate in some degree of isolation. Without the interaction, you don't get cooperative. So when we joined the Dude Ranchers Association, I was young. I got to know and became great friends with people older than me who knew a lot more than I did. And some of them were really kind and took us under their wing and made us better ranchers and better people and, helped us in immeasurable, varied ways. It just gave me such an appreciation for dude ranching. I mean, I've done 3 books, photos of ranches, dude ranches in Arizona and dude ranches in Wyoming, 2 different books. All these things have just shown me the shockingly big role that dude ranching had in the formative years of the West. When, really, we're talking about late 1800s when things really started to roll in the West. Dude ranching really put that on steroids and had an impact earlier than it would have without them. That's all to say that I have an inordinate appreciation. I'm the biggest fan of dude ranching. And so when we have the opportunity to apply a philosophy that's not new in any shape, way, or form, that we can centralize reservations, centralize business, apply tried and true chain or multiple property hospitality. They're doing group buying, centralized reservations, centralized marketing. They're taking all the business piece and then allowing the folks on the ground to do the important stuff. And that's hosting guests, managing staff, dealing with the crises that are inevitable in any business. And that makes these smaller ranches that are typically very financially tenuous and making them a little less volatile and, efficiencies of scale and all the things that everybody knew long ago. Nobody's tried it in dude ranching. We've had limited success. We're still really small, but it's our way in our mind of making dude ranches. We never think we're saving dude ranching. That it doesn't need saving, and that's well beyond us. But you know what? If we can save, as we have, 5 dude ranches at this point, we're pretty happy about that, and we're still working toward growing that opportunity.
Makes a lot of sense. I'm curious to know some of the ones that you have taken over because they've been left and not operating. Is that because they were just financially not able to keep operating? Is there any reason that some of them kind of fell off the wagon?
In that regard, there are 2 reasons. They failed financially. We've reopened a couple that had that happen. The second reason that a lot of ranches just sort of close or stagnate or descend into closure is their family operation. And we all look at the younger generations and go, oh, they're not as good as we were. But I can tell you that they're demonstrating, and maybe they're the ones who are right, they don't want to work this hard. If they're going to work 7 days a week, and they want to be fairly compensated. And this business doesn't do that. We always joke that you get rich when you sell your ranch. And I have a friend, that's what he said. He put his ranch up for sale. I was just stunned. I said, really? I thought the kids, he says, they just faced the reality that they didn't want to do it without us, and we can't do it forever. And so it's for sale. And that leads us to the third threat, the rapid escalation of particularly beautiful rural real estate. The values are skyrocketing. And dude ranches, they can't justify those prices. So when a ranch sells, I have a friend, he's selling his ranch, I think $21 million. I'm sure it's worth it. Sad to say, it's not going to be a dude ranch unless somebody just comes in with this giant pocketbook of money and wants to have a dude ranch for a vanity project. Because I guarantee you it won't pencil out for $21 million on his best day in the best economy. So that's the third and the most frightening threat to me to dude ranches is just the attention that the wealthy in America are now paying to the finite resource of land.
That's quite sad to hear, isn't it? And so it really does lead into that. It's conservation of history that is an important aspect of what you're doing.
Well, I'll tell you a story that symbolizes it to me. We were talking to an 88-year-old and his 84-year-old wife. And they had their ranch for sale, and we were trying to make a deal with them. We didn't, but we were trying. And it sort of came up, the topic was purchasing the ranch. But one of our digressions was, guys, you're 88 and 84, you're still doing this. And they said, yeah, we're tired and we want to retire, but we just want to make sure that somebody buys this and runs it as a dude ranch because we've done it over 60 years. People need this so much, more than ever. And we just feel that this place, their ranch, needs to be welcoming guests to this experience. They were negatively impacting their own values, price-wise, value, price, because they wanted it to be a dude ranch and because people needed it. I found it very inspirational. I'll just give you a number. Tucson was the dude ranch capital of the world. So Tucson's where I live. Our ranch is 15 miles out of downtown Tucson, about 1 million person metropolitan area. There were once 128 dude ranches within an hour of Tucson. There are now 2.
128 dude ranches down to 2 is a huge drop for that area. After chatting with Russell, I have learnt a whole lot more about this topic, and it now saddens me to think about these important parts of history being lost. Makes me want to go and stay on a dude ranch sometime soon. Anyway, I hope all of these guests help you think about the importance of conservation of all kinds in tourism setting, and maybe might even influence some of the decisions you make for future trips. Definitely does for me. Thank you so much for listening to episode 398 of the Thoughtful Travel podcast. As always, huge thanks to my guests. I started off chatting with James Ward of Rewild Safaris. More about them at rewildsafaris.com. Next, I chatted with Joshua Zukas, and more about Joshua and his writing at joshuazukas.com. And lastly, I chatted with Russell True of the True Ranch Collection. You can see his ranch at trueranchcollection.com. And also, if you're curious to know more, check out the Ranch Preservation Foundation at ranchpreservationfoundation.org. Don't forget, come and chat with us in the Facebook or LinkedIn groups. Just search for Thoughtful Travellers in those platforms and you'll find us. And sign up for the Thoughtful Travellers newsletter at thoughtfultravel.substack.com. All of these links and more will be in the show notes. And for this episode, you can find them at notaballerina.com/398. As always, thank you so much for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.